Have you ever witnessed a moment so extraordinary, so unlikely, that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the wild? Deep in the dense forests of the American Northwest, a wounded grizzly bear, desperate and out of strength, stumbled upon an unlikely companion, a powerful gorilla reintroduced into the region for conservation. What happened between these two creatures, predator and protector, worlds apart, would leave witnesses speechless, scientists stunned, and the world in tears. This is not a story of fantasy. It is a story of survival, of compassion, and of a bond that no one could have imagined. Stay with us, because what happens next will change the way you look at nature forever. The morning sun filtered through towering pines, scattering golden light across the mossy ground. The forest was alive with birdsong and the quiet rustle of leaves. Yet in one hidden valley, silence took hold. A young grizzly bear, his massive frame weakened by days without food, limped slowly through the undergrowth. His ribs showed beneath his thick fur, his breath ragged from exhaustion. This bear had once been strong, roaming proudly through the meadows of Yellowstone, fishing in the rivers and climbing rocky slopes. But a week earlier, disaster had struck. A rock slide, triggered by sudden heavy rains, had trapped him beneath fallen logs. Though he had freed himself, his leg had been badly injured, and his usual strength was gone. Every step was agony. His search for food brought him no relief. The fish eluded him, the berries were gone, and even small prey slipped from his weakened paws. Hunger gnawed at him, pain slowed him, and fear, though rare for such a beast, had begun to take root. That morning, his legs finally gave way. He collapsed beside a stream, his muzzle falling into the cold water. His body shook as he tried to rise, but he couldn't. He let out a deep groan, a sound more of despair than of strength. It echoed faintly between the trees, a cry that was both powerful and pitiful. Miles away, another creature stirred. A silverback gorilla, part of a small group reintroduced for a bold conservation experiment, had wandered further than usual. Strong and watchful, he moved with deliberate steps, pulling down branches for fruit. But as he paused, his ears caught something unusual, a sound unlike any he had heard before. It was not the howl of a wolf, nor the call of elk. It was heavier, deeper, filled with pain. Curious, he followed the sound. His massive hands pushed aside branches, his chest rising and falling with steady power. At last, he reached the stream and froze. There, lying in the sunlight, was a grizzly bear, a creature much larger, known to be fierce and dangerous, now broken and trembling. The gorilla tilted his head, studying the bear carefully. His instincts told him to retreat, to avoid the predator. But something in the bear's eyes, half closed, glistening with weakness, stopped him. The bear lifted his head slightly. With all the strength he had left, he let out another groan, softer this time, almost like a plea. His eyes locked with the gorilla's. It was not a look of threat. It was a look of desperation. For a long moment, neither moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The gorilla shifted his weight, his dark eyes narrowing as though he understood. Against every natural instinct, instead of retreating, he stepped closer. The bear did not resist. He simply lowered his head again, his body shivering as though surrendering to fate. And there, on that quiet morning, two of the world's most powerful animals stood together, not as enemies, but as something else, something no one could have ever imagined. The story of survival and compassion was only beginning. The silverback did not flee. He stood on the opposite bank of the stream, chest rising and falling, nostrils tasting the air that smelled of cold water and conifer sap, and of pain. The grizzly's sides shuddered with each breath. One hind leg splayed at an awkward angle, swollen at the joint, the fur matted with mud and the faint iron tang of old blood. When the bear lifted his head again, the soft groan that came from his throat sounded less like a warning and more like a request. Caution carried the gorilla forward in a slow arc, not directly at the bear, but around him, palms touching the ground, weight distributed as if every twig beneath him might speak. He stopped just shy of the shallows. The current lapped and murmured, carrying winter's last chill. The silverback dipped one hand, then the other, brought water to his own lips, tested the temperature, and glanced back at the bear. He tried again, this time scooping and letting the water drizzle from his black fingers onto the grizzly's nose. The grizzly startled, then stilled. His tongue flicked. The gorilla repeated the motion, scoop and fall, until the bear's breathing settled into a slower, steadier rhythm. It wasn't much. It was something. A jay scolded from an alder. Somewhere uphill a branch gave a sharp crack and fell. Sun fell in broken coins through the crowns of firs, warming the mud and the wounded animal lying in it. The gorilla straightened and scanned the river corridor. A patch of spring shoots dotted the bank where floodwaters had receded, tender cow parsnip and fern croziers just unrolling. He moved there in 3 quiet strides, tore the stems free with a twist, and returned with the pale bundles clutched against his chest. The bear lifted his head again, nostrils flaring. He was not a grazer, not by habit, but hunger rewrites rules. The gorilla laid the stems near the grizzly's muzzle and retreated 2 paces, knuckles in the wet sand, head low. The grizzly sniffed, pulled in 2 stems with blunt teeth, chewed weakly, and swallowed. A third followed. He exhaled a long, rough breath, more relief than sound. The silverback watched every movement. He gathered more, a wider armload this time that included roots torn from the soft bank. When he returned, he set them near but never over the bear's paws. He had learned, somewhere in the long library of his species' memory, to leave an exit open even for trust. A shadow slipped at the tree line. The gorilla's head shot up, eyes narrowing. Coyotes, 2 of them, lean and damp from the brush, ears like pennants. They trotted the edge of the clearing with that easy, fearless step of animals that prosper in the seams where fear and opportunity meet. The silverback rose to his full height. His body was a wall. He did not bellow, not yet. He planted 1 foot, swung his arms wide, and gave a short chest beat that cracked the quiet like thunder trapped in a drum. The coyotes froze. One tested the air, then took 2 steps sideways, angling for a better scent on the water. The silverback's lips peeled just enough to show the white line of his teeth. This time he beat harder, a heavy, rolling cadence accompanied by a forward lunge that sent water arcing into sunlight. The coyotes broke, tails low, feet light upon the leaf mold as they slid back into green shadow. The gorilla held his stance until the last leaf ceased trembling. Only when the forest settled did the silverback crouch again by the stream. He scooped more water. The bear, eyes glassed with pain but awake, watched. A fly worried the cut along his leg. The gorilla flicked it away with the back of a finger and then carefully used a broad, wet maple leaf to wipe mud from the wound's edge. The grizzly's lips lifted, the reflexive curl of a mouth fitted for force, and then dropped. No blow came, only breath. A long hour passed that way. Water and stems, watchfulness, and the delicate work of doing nothing reckless. The bear's tremors eased. He tried to roll to the good side and nearly made it. When he failed, he hooked the earth with his claws and grunted, a frustrated sound that thudded in his chest. The gorilla moved to the other side and, with the careful leverage of a creature who understands weight, wedged a drifted branch under the bear's shoulder to give him purchase. The bear used it, heaved, and got his ribs off the cold mud by 2 inches. The relief that washed his face was unmistakable. That was when the silverback heard it. Faint at first, then clearer. The distant drone of an engine. Not thunder, not wind. Tires on gravel, intermittent, climbing the service track that paralleled the creek. The gorilla froze, tipping his head. The grizzly did not. He was too busy surviving the next breath. The engine cut. A truck door thumped. Voices, human, spilled down through the pines, one low and measured, one sharp with laughter. The gorilla's shoulders swelled, then tightened. He turned, placing his body between the sound and the injured bear. His eyes, dark and steady, fixed on the gap in the trees where the trail met the river stones. The forest held its breath a second time that day. The bear swallowed, blinked, and lifted his muzzle toward the gorilla's back, as if to ask the same impossible question. "Will you stand?" Boots scraped bark. A metal latch clinked. The silverback rocked forward on his knuckles and drew a breath as deep as the valley. Help or harm was coming, and neither of them could afford to guess wrong. The first human voice cut through the hush of the trees like a stone thrown into still water. The grizzly's ears twitched, head lifting despite the weight of exhaustion. His eyes flickered, alarm rushing through his body. Instinct told him to bolt, but pain tethered him to the ground. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, his claws scraping the dirt as if to dig himself into the earth for safety. The silverback shifted, stepping forward, his back straight and massive. He was no longer just a caretaker, but a sentinel. The gorilla had seen humans before, far away, moving through the trees, carrying bright tools and speaking in voices that startled birds from the canopy. They were unpredictable, neither predator nor prey, but something far more complicated. Still, something in the gorilla's deep intuition told him this moment mattered. Branches parted at the edge of the creek. A woman stepped into view, her boots muddy, her jacket zipped against the cool morning air. She was lean, strong, her hair tied back under a ranger's cap. In one hand, she carried a first aid kit strapped to her belt. In the other, a long walking stick polished by years of use. Behind her came a younger ranger, carrying a radio clipped to his vest. The woman stopped dead when she saw the scene before her. A massive grizzly sprawled in the mud, chest rising with shallow effort, and beside him, towering and still as a statue, a silverback gorilla. Her hand froze on the stick. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The younger ranger whispered a curse under his breath, fumbling for his radio. The gorilla gave a low rumble, not quite a growl, not quite a call, something in between. His arms flexed, muscles taut, but he didn't advance. Instead, he crouched beside the bear again and dipped his hand into the water, letting it spill across the grizzly's face. It was as if he were showing the humans, "See what I do. Understand why I stay." The woman's chest tightened. She had worked years in wildlife rescue, seen things she could hardly retell, but never this. Never a cross-species act of guardianship so deliberate, so unexplainable. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her palm, showing it open and empty. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling more from awe than fear. "We're here to help." The grizzly shifted weakly, his head lolling toward her voice. The gorilla studied her eyes. There was no weapon raised, no rush forward, no threat. Only stillness. For a long moment, it felt like the entire forest held its breath again, waiting for the silverback's verdict. He gave it in silence. He stood, moved 2 steps back, and settled against a mossy stone. His gaze never left the humans, but he made no move to stop them. He had granted space, reluctant, heavy with tension, but real. The woman's knees nearly buckled. She nodded to her partner, who opened the med kit and handed her a gauze roll. Kneeling beside the bear, she pressed lightly against the swollen leg. The bear flinched, groaning, but didn't strike. His eyes darted toward the gorilla, then back to her, as if measuring this strange alliance forming around him. The ranger cleaned mud from the wound, pouring antiseptic across the torn skin. Steam rose faintly as the liquid hit warm flesh. The bear whimpered low, but the gorilla answered with a single chest thump. Not aggressive, but grounding. The sound reverberated through the clearing like a drumbeat of reassurance. The bear's trembling eased. Minutes felt like hours. The leg was bound, the wound cleaned as best as the ranger could manage in the open woods. When it was done, she sat back on her heels, exhaling hard, her hands shaking slightly. The grizzly lay calmer now, his breathing steadier, though weakness still clung to every part of him. He turned his head toward the gorilla once more. The silverback tilted his head, as if acknowledging that survival was no longer in his hands alone. The woman glanced at her partner, then back at the gorilla. "I don't know if anyone will believe this," she murmured. The gorilla blinked, slow and heavy, and returned his eyes to the bear. His duty wasn't over. The rangers prepared a makeshift stretcher from canvas and poles, but the forest felt fragile, as though one wrong move could shatter the balance. Between fear and faith, all 3 species stood bound in a fragile truce, each dependent on the other. When the woman finally gestured for help lifting the bear, she wasn't looking at her fellow ranger. She was looking at the gorilla. And against every law of nature anyone had ever believed, he moved toward her. The stretcher lay stretched on the damp ground, 2 long poles bound with canvas and rope. The rangers had built it quickly, their fingers working with a mix of urgency and disbelief. But now came the impossible part, lifting a half-conscious, 300-pound grizzly onto it without sparking panic or violence. Emma, The senior ranger wiped her brow, her heart pounding. She glanced at the silverback sitting near the mossy stone. His chest rose and fell slowly, his amber eyes steady. He wasn't moving to attack, but he wasn't yielding either. It was as though he had set invisible boundaries no one dared to cross. The young ranger, Kyle, leaned closer to her. "We can't do this with just the two of us," he whispered. Not without risking him rolling off, or worse, lashing out. Emma swallowed. She already knew. Her gaze flicked toward the gorilla again. She didn't dare speak the thought aloud, but it hung in the clearing like mist. What if he helps us? She crouched lower, careful not to make any sudden movement. Her voice came soft, steady, carrying the same tone she used for frightened animals. "We need to move him," she said, her eyes locked on the silverback. "Please, help us." The gorilla's head tilted. His broad shoulders shifted, and he tapped the ground once with his knuckles. His eyes drifted from the rangers to the bear, then back again. It was as though he weighed the risk against the bond he had already chosen. Then, slowly, he rose. Kyle's hand shot to his radio. "Emma." She shook her head quickly. "Don't. Just let him." The gorilla approached the stretcher, every step deliberate. His massive hands curled around the poles, testing their strength, his fingers brushing the canvas. For a moment, it looked as if he might tear the contraption apart. Instead, he let out a low grunt, glanced at Emma, and then crouched near the bear. Emma's breath caught. He understands. Together, they worked in silence. Kyle and Emma lifted one side, the gorilla the other. The bear groaned as his body shifted, his claws dragging faint grooves into the earth. The gorilla adjusted his grip with surprising gentleness, his movements careful, almost cautious, as if afraid of worsening the bear's pain. With slow precision, they laid the grizzly across the canvas. His chest heaved, his eyes fluttering but not opening fully. A faint whimper escaped him. Emma stroked the thick fur along his neck. "Easy, boy. You're safe." The gorilla watched, his nostrils flaring as though memorizing every sound and scent. Then, without being asked, he lifted one side of the stretcher again. His strength made the task almost effortless. Kyle and Emma scrambled to the other side, gripping tightly, their boots sinking into the mud. Step by step, the strange trio carried the wounded bear out of the clearing. The forest floor was uneven, roots and stones threatening to trip them at every turn. More than once, Emma stumbled, but the gorilla steadied the load, adjusting his weight with uncanny coordination. Birds scattered from the treetops, startled by the surreal sight. Two humans and a gorilla carrying a bear together, bound not by survival of the fittest, but by something far rarer: trust. When they finally reached the ranger trail, Emma halted, chest burning with exertion. She looked at the gorilla, who still held his side of the stretcher firmly. Their eyes met again. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. For the first time, the gorilla's lips parted. Not a snarl, not a warning, but something softer, almost contemplative. He set the stretcher down gently and thumped his chest once, a sound that echoed through the trees like a promise. Then he stepped back, fading into the undergrowth. The rangers called out, but he didn't return. His part was done. And in that silence, Emma realized they had just witnessed something beyond science, beyond training. A choice made by a creature who owed them nothing, yet gave everything. The stretcher jolted as Emma and Kyle maneuvered it down the narrow trail. Every bump felt like a thunderclap to Emma's nerves. Each groan from the Grizzly was a reminder of how fragile his life had become. His breaths were shallow, uneven, sometimes catching as though the weight of the fallen tree still pressed against his chest. Snowflakes began to fall again, light at first, then heavier, sticking to their jackets and the thick fur of the bear. The forest seemed endless, the path twisting through pines whose branches sagged under the weight of winter. Every step drained their strength, but neither ranger slowed. "We're losing daylight," Kyle muttered, panting. He tightened his grip on the stretcher, his gloves stiff with cold. If his ribs are broken, he might not make it. Emma's jaw clenched. He's going to make it. He has to. They had radioed ahead, and a small rescue team was rushing to meet them at the edge of the valley. But time stretched like an enemy. Emma could almost hear the ticking in her ears, louder than the crunch of boots on snow. The bear stirred faintly. His paw twitched against the canvas, claws scraping. His eyes blinked open for a heartbeat, glazed and filled with something Emma couldn't name. Fear, pain, or maybe a plea. She reached down with her free hand, brushing her glove over his head. "Stay with us, big guy. Just a little longer." Kyle's breath came in ragged bursts. "Emma, if he doesn't make it, people are going to say we risked everything for nothing." She shot him a sharp look. "Then they don't understand. You don't walk away when something depends on you. Not ever." The trail dipped steeply, forcing them to slow. The stretcher tilted, the bear sliding slightly. Kyle cursed, adjusting his grip. Emma steadied the load with her shoulder, her muscles burning. For a moment, it felt impossible. Then she thought of the gorilla, the quiet strength, the choice he had made to help. That memory lit a fire inside her. If an animal bound by instinct could act with compassion, then so could they. Finally, the forest opened into a clearing. In the distance, headlights cut through the snowfall. The rescue team. Relief surged through Emma so sharply it almost made her cry. They pushed forward, legs trembling. 2 rangers rushed to meet them, taking hold of the stretcher, easing the weight. Emma nearly collapsed as the burden lifted from her shoulders. The bear whimpered again, his chest rattling with every breath. One of the medics crouched low, stethoscope pressed against the thick fur. His face hardened. Collapsed lung, broken ribs. He needs oxygen now. The team moved swiftly, placing a mask over the grizzly's muzzle, adjusting the straps with trembling urgency. The sight was almost surreal. Wild power reduced to helplessness, now utterly reliant on human hands. Emma stood back, chest heaving, watching. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the bear, the team, even the trail where the gorilla's footprints had already begun to fade. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the medic looked up. "He's stabilizing. It's fragile, but he has a chance." Emma exhaled, a sob breaking free. She leaned against a tree, exhaustion pulling at her every muscle. But inside her chest, something warm bloomed, a fragile hope, as fragile as the bear's next breath. As the snow thickened, the stretcher was loaded into a transport sled pulled by a snowmobile. The engine roared, carrying the Grizzly toward care, toward life. Emma stayed behind for a moment, staring at the dark forest. She thought of the gorilla once more. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, he had returned to his world. Yet his choice had altered everything. And as Emma followed the sled tracks through the snow, she whispered into the frozen air, "We won't let his gift be wasted." The transport sled roared across the frozen valley, carrying the Grizzly to the ranger station's makeshift wildlife clinic. Emma and Kyle followed close behind on a second snowmobile, the icy wind whipping at their faces. Emma's arms ached, but her heart beat only one thought. Please, let him live. By the time they arrived, the sky had turned ink black, the snow glowing silver beneath a full moon. Inside the cabin, lanterns cast a soft light over the wooden walls. The small clinic smelled of antiseptic and pine. The bear lay stretched across a reinforced table, his breaths shallow but steady under the oxygen mask. Dr. Harris, the station's veterinarian, worked quickly. His hands moved with both urgency and precision, examining the Grizzly's ribs, checking for internal bleeding. Collapsed lung, 2 broken ribs, muscle tears. "He's lucky to be alive," Harris murmured. Emma stood nearby, watching every movement. Her gloves were still wet, her clothes streaked with dirt and blood. She hadn't noticed until now how much she was trembling. Kyle touched her shoulder. "You need rest, Emma. You've done everything you could." But Emma shook her head. "Not yet. Not until I know he's safe." The clinic was quiet, except for the hum of equipment and the bear's faint groans. Every sound echoed like thunder in Emma's ears. She remembered his paw twitching, his eyes opening for that fleeting moment on the trail. There had been something in them, an unspoken plea, a flicker of trust. That memory bound her to him now, as if leaving his side would mean breaking a promise. Hours passed. Harris stitched wounds, wrapped bandages, and inserted an IV drip. The Grizzly's chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath a fragile victory. Emma found herself whispering encouragement, not knowing if he could hear. "You fought so hard out there," she said softly, leaning close. "Don't give up now, not after everything." Kyle brought her a thermos of coffee, but she barely touched it. Instead, she sat on the floor beside the table, her back pressed against the wood, listening to the steady rhythm of the bear's breathing. Each exhale reassured her he was still there, still fighting. At one point, Harris paused and looked at her. His expression softened. "Emma, you know most wild animals wouldn't survive this. The stress alone can kill them. But this one, he has a will I've rarely seen." She swallowed hard, her eyes brimming. Maybe it's because he wasn't fighting alone. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. The night dragged on, a test of patience and hope. Emma drifted in and out of shallow sleep, startled awake every time the bear shifted or groaned. Near dawn, Harris finally exhaled in relief. "He's stable. It's too soon to know if he'll fully recover, but he's stable." Emma covered her mouth with her hands, stifling a sob. For the first time since the tree had fallen, she allowed herself to believe he might survive. The first rays of morning light slipped through the window, painting the room in pale gold. Emma stood, stretching her stiff legs. She placed her hand gently on the bear's massive paw. "You made it through the night," she whispered. "Now we'll see what tomorrow brings." The grizzly didn't stir, but his chest rose and fell, steady and strong. And in that simple rhythm, Emma found something she hadn't felt in days: peace. The following days were slow, filled with both tension and quiet victories. The grizzly bear remained under constant observation, his breaths still labored but growing stronger. Emma hardly left his side, curling up in a chair at night, refusing to let him fight alone. Every small improvement felt monumental. The first time his paw twitched with more strength, the moment he lifted his head briefly, and, finally, the day he opened his eyes fully. When his gaze met Emma's, the entire room seemed to still. His eyes, once clouded by pain, now carried a softness that stunned her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't wild panic. It was something closer to recognition. Emma leaned forward, her throat tight. "You remember me, don't you?" she whispered. The bear's eyes blinked slowly, his breath steady. It wasn't an answer she could measure, but she felt it in her bones. Over the next week, Harris monitored the bear's progress with cautious optimism. "He'll need time," he said, tightening a bandage. "But he's a fighter. He'll make it." Each day, Emma helped in small ways, keeping him calm, speaking in a low voice, even humming softly. The staff was astonished. Wild grizzlies didn't usually tolerate human presence, yet this one seemed to draw strength from her nearness. One crisp morning, as snowflakes drifted lazily outside, Harris made the decision. It's time. He's strong enough to be released. Emma's chest tightened. She knew this moment would come. But the thought of saying goodbye felt heavier than the storm clouds that had once rolled over the mountains. They transported the bear to the edge of the forest where his ordeal had begun. The air was cold, sharp with pine and frost. The world was quiet, as if it too held its breath. When the cage door opened, the grizzly hesitated. His massive body shifted slowly, his paws crunching into the snow as he stepped out. He stood tall, his frame still bandaged, but undeniably strong again. Emma remained a few steps back, her hands clasped tightly. She knew she couldn't move closer, couldn't reach out like she longed to. This was his moment, his freedom. The bear turned his head. For a fleeting instant, their eyes met across the distance. In that look, Emma felt the weight of everything they had endured: the fear, the fight, the nights of waiting, and the fragile bond that had formed. And then, in a motion that stunned even the hardened rangers, the bear lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging her, a gesture of respect, of gratitude. Emma's tears blurred the snow before her. She pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking with the power of the moment. The bear turned then, lumbering toward the tree line, his massive form disappearing into the forest shadows. The silence that followed was profound, filled not with loss, but with something larger: hope. Kyle placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved him, Emma. But maybe he saved you too." Emma nodded, her heart full. She had entered that night broken by fear and uncertainty, but now she stood stronger, carrying the memory of a bond no one would believe, except those who knew the language of compassion. As the sun broke through the clouds, painting the snow in gold, Emma whispered, "Goodbye, my friend." If this story touched your heart, remember this: compassion knows no boundaries, neither species nor circumstance. When courage meets empathy, miracles can happen. Subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes in the power of kindness. Together, we can spread hope.